The fluorescent lights in my office cubicle seemed to buzz louder than usual as I stared at the email that had just appeared in my inbox. Meeting request, HR discussion, urgent, sat there like a digital bomb, the sender's name making my stomach clench. Patricia Morrison, Human Resources Director. In my 15 years at Clearwater Marketing Solutions, I'd never received an urgent HR meeting request. Never. The cursor blinked mockingly as I read the brief message again, trying to decode what "discuss recent concerns brought to our attention regarding workplace conduct" could possibly mean. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my coffee mug, the ceramic handle suddenly feeling foreign against my palm. Around me, the familiar sounds of my workplace continued, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the distant hum of the copy machine. But everything felt muted, as if I were hearing it all through thick glass. What workplace conduct issues could they possibly have with me? I prided myself on my professionalism, my punctuality, my dedication to every project that crossed my desk. Before I tell you this incredible story, please hit like and subscribe. I'd love to know in the comments which city you're watching from. My name is Margaret Adams. I'm 57 years old, and I thought I knew exactly who I could trust in this world. For the past 3 years, I'd considered Jennifer Walsh my closest friend. We'd met at a community book club, bonded over our shared love of mystery novels and Earl Grey tea, and slowly built what I believed was an unshakable friendship. Jennifer was the person I called when my tomatoes were finally ripening, when I found a great sale at the department store, when I needed someone to laugh with about the absurdities of modern life. She had shoulder-length auburn hair that she was always tucking behind her ears when she got excited about something, and the most genuine laugh I'd ever heard. Or so I thought. My husband, Robert Adams, had been my anchor for 32 years of marriage, a steady presence who worked as a maintenance supervisor at the local high school. At 59, he still had the same gentle brown eyes that had first caught my attention at a church social in 1992, though his hairline had retreated and his waist had expanded slightly over the decades. Robert was the kind of man who noticed when I seemed troubled, who would set down his evening newspaper and really listen when I needed to talk through a problem. Our daughter, Sarah Adams, 28 years old and working as a dental hygienist across town, had inherited her father's intuitive nature and my stubborn streak. She visited every Sunday for dinner, bringing her infectious energy and an endless stream of stories about her patients and coworkers. Then there was Linda Porter, my colleague in the marketing department, and perhaps the most reliable person I'd ever known. At 52, Linda had worked at Clearwater for nearly 20 years, climbing from an entry-level position to senior marketing coordinator through sheer determination and an uncanny ability to spot problems before they became disasters. Her salt and pepper hair was always pulled back in a practical bun, and she had a habit of keeping detailed notes about everything, a trait that had saved our department more times than I could count. Linda and I shared the responsibility for the company's largest client accounts, and I'd come to depend on her analytical mind and dry sense of humor during our most stressful deadlines. The meeting with Patricia Morrison was scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m., giving me exactly 24 hours to spiral into anxiety about what could have prompted this sudden scrutiny. I tried to focus on the Henderson account proposal spread across my desk, but the words seemed to swim together meaninglessly. My mind kept circling back to that phrase. Recent concerns brought to our attention. Who had brought concerns? What kind of concerns? I'd been nothing but professional with every client, every coworker, every vendor we dealt with. As the afternoon dragged on, I found myself replaying recent interactions, searching for anything that might have been misconstrued or misunderstood. Had I been too direct in last week's client meeting? Too casual in my email communications? The uncertainty was eating at me from the inside, creating a hollow ache in my chest that I couldn't shake. When I finally gathered the courage to walk over to Linda's desk, I noticed she looked up with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between sympathy and concern. "Linda," I began quietly, glancing around to make sure we wouldn't be overheard. "Have you noticed anything unusual lately? Anyone asking questions about me or my work?" Linda's fingers stopped moving across her keyboard, and she turned in her chair to face me fully. There was definitely something in her eyes now, a knowledge that made my pulse quicken. "Margaret," she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was hoping you'd come talk to me. There's something you need to know." The way she said it, with such careful deliberation, told me that whatever she was about to reveal would change everything I thought I understood about my situation. The busy office sounds faded into the background again as I waited for her to continue, my heart hammering against my ribs. One small detail blew the whole thing open. Linda glanced around the office once more, then gestured for me to lean closer. "Margaret, about 3 weeks ago, I started noticing Patricia having these hushed phone conversations. You know how thin the walls are between her office and the copy room." She paused, seeming to weigh her words carefully. "At first, I didn't think much of it, but then I heard your name mentioned several times." My stomach dropped. "What exactly did you hear?" "Fragments, mostly. Something about unprofessional conduct and client complaints. But here's the thing that bothered me. I pulled the client satisfaction reports for our department last week, thinking maybe I'd missed something." Linda opened her desk drawer and discreetly showed me a folder. "Every single one of your accounts shows excellent ratings. The Henderson project specifically got glowing feedback just last month. The pieces weren't adding up, and that somehow made everything worse. If my work performance was solid, then what was driving these mysterious complaints?" "Did you recognize the voice on the other end of Patricia's calls?" Linda hesitated, and I could see her internal struggle playing out across her features. She was naturally cautious, the type of person who verified facts twice before drawing conclusions. "I'm not certain, but—" She trailed off, then seemed to steel herself. "Margaret, do you remember last Tuesday when Sarah stopped by the office?" The mention of Sarah's name hit me like cold water. My best friend of 15 years, Sarah Chen, had indeed visited the office last week. She'd claimed she was in the neighborhood and wanted to grab lunch, but now that I thought about it, she'd seemed unusually interested in the layout of our floor, asking questions about who sat where and how the reporting structure worked. "She said she wanted to see where I worked," I said slowly, my mind racing back through that afternoon. "But she spent a lot of time chatting with the receptionist, didn't she? And she asked about Patricia specifically." Linda nodded grimly. "She did. And Margaret, I hate to say this, but the timing lines up. Patricia's first mysterious phone call happened the day after Sarah's visit. The fluorescent lights overhead suddenly seemed too bright, making everything feel surreal and harsh. Sarah had been my closest friend since college, the person I called when I needed advice, when I celebrated promotions, when life felt overwhelming. We'd been each other's bridesmaids, shared countless dinners and movie nights, survived each other's dating disasters and career setbacks. The idea that she could be systematically sabotaging my professional reputation was so foreign to everything I believed about our friendship that I couldn't quite process it. But why would Sarah do something like this? I whispered, more to myself than to Linda. "We've never had a serious fight. I was just at her birthday party last month." Linda's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I don't know, Margaret. I wish I did. But there's something else you should be aware of before your meeting tomorrow." She glanced at her computer screen, then back at me. I overheard Patricia on the phone again this morning, and she mentioned expecting another call this afternoon with additional documentation. My mouth went dry. Additional documentation suggested this wasn't just verbal complaints anymore. Someone was providing written evidence of supposed misconduct. The methodical nature of it felt calculated, deliberate, and completely at odds with the Sarah I thought I knew. The rest of the workday passed in a fog of disbelief and mounting dread. I tried to focus on routine tasks, but my mind kept cycling through memories of recent interactions with Sarah, searching for clues I might have missed. Had there been resentment I'd failed to notice? Professional jealousy? Some perceived slight that had festered into active hostility? By the time I reached my apartment that evening, the emotional exhaustion was overwhelming. I collapsed onto my couch and stared at my phone, Sarah's number prominently displayed in my recent contacts. Part of me wanted to call her immediately, to demand an explanation and confront her with Linda's suspicions. But another part of me, the part that still couldn't quite believe my closest friend would betray me so completely, hesitated. What if Linda was wrong? What if the timing was coincidental and I was about to destroy a treasured friendship over office paranoia? But as I sat there in the growing darkness of my living room, one detail kept surfacing that I couldn't dismiss. During Sarah's office visit, she'd made a point of asking about my work schedule, my client meetings, even my relationship with Patricia. At the time, her questions had seemed like natural, friendly interest. Now they felt like reconnaissance. The sound of my phone buzzing interrupted my brooding. A text message from Sarah appeared on the screen. "Hope you're having a good week. Want to grab dinner this weekend and catch up?" I stared at the message for a long moment, struck by the casual normalcy of her tone. If she was indeed orchestrating a campaign against my career, how could she maintain such an easy, friendly facade? The cognitive dissonance was staggering. Before I could second-guess myself, I typed back, "Actually, I need to talk to you about something important. Can you come over tonight?" Her response came quickly. "Of course. Everything okay? I'll be there in an hour." As I waited for Sarah to arrive, I paced my apartment and rehearsed different approaches to the conversation ahead. How do you ask someone you love like a sister if they're secretly trying to destroy your livelihood? How do you navigate that kind of confrontation without irreparably damaging the relationship, especially if you're wrong about their motives? When Sarah's familiar knock came at my door, my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I opened the door to find her usual warm smile, the same expression of genuine concern and affection that had been a constant in my life for over a decade. "You sounded upset in your text," she said, stepping inside and giving me the same casual hug she'd given me hundreds of times before. "What's going on?" But as she pulled back from the hug and I looked into her eyes, I saw something I'd never noticed before. A flicker of something that made my stomach drop. It wasn't guilt exactly, but a kind of wariness, like she was bracing herself for something she'd been expecting. "Come sit down," I said, gesturing toward the couch. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Sarah settled into her usual spot on the left side of my couch, tucking one leg beneath her in that familiar way. For a moment, we sat in the kind of comfortable silence that had marked our friendship for years. But tonight, that silence felt loaded with unspoken tensions. "Sarah," I began, then stopped. The words felt impossible to form. How do you accuse someone who's been like a sister to you of systematic betrayal? "You're scaring me a little," she said softly. "What's this about?" I took a deep breath and decided on directness. "Someone has been calling my office, making complaints about my work, my behavior with clients. Patricia thinks it might be someone I know personally. I watched her face carefully as I spoke. Sarah's expression remained concerned and sympathetic, but I caught the way her hands tightened slightly in her lap. "That's awful," she said. "Who would do something like that? Do you have any idea who it could be?" The question hung between us. This was my moment to either retreat or push forward into territory that might change everything between us. "You visited my office last week," I said quietly. "You asked a lot of questions about my work, my clients, my schedule." Sarah's face went very still. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. When she finally responded, her voice had lost some of its warmth. "Are you asking me if I'm the one making those calls?" "I'm asking you to help me understand what's been happening, because the timing is really strange, Sarah. These complaints started right after you came to see me." She stood up abruptly, pacing to my kitchen and back. When she turned to face me again, her expression was different. The mask of concerned friendship had slipped, revealing something harder underneath. "You want to know what I think?" she said, her voice taking on an edge I'd rarely heard before. "I think you've become incredibly self-absorbed. Everything is always about your job, your success, your problems. When was the last time you asked me how I was doing? Really asked, not just as polite conversation." The sudden shift in her tone caught me off guard. "Sarah, that's not what this is about, isn't it? You immediately assume I'm somehow sabotaging you, instead of considering that maybe, just maybe, you're not as perfect as you think you are." I felt my own anger rising. "So, you admit you made those calls?" "I admit nothing, but I will say this. If people are complaining about you, maybe you should look at your own behavior instead of blaming your friends." The cruelty in her voice was like a physical blow. This wasn't the Sarah I knew. Or maybe this was exactly who she'd always been, and I'd been too naive to see it. "Get out," I said quietly. "What?" "Get out of my apartment. Now." Sarah stared at me for a moment, and I saw something that looked almost like regret flicker across her features. But then her expression hardened again. "Fine, but don't come crying to me when you realize you've destroyed a 10-year friendship over office politics and paranoia." She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, then turned back one last time. "You know what your real problem is? You can't stand that some of us didn't get handed everything on a silver platter. Some of us have had to struggle while watching you coast through life getting promoted and praised for work that honestly isn't that impressive." The door slammed behind her, leaving me alone with the echo of her words and the devastating realization that Linda had been right. My closest friend had indeed been working to undermine me, driven by a resentment I'd never even suspected existed. I sank back onto the couch, my phone in my hands, staring at Linda's contact information. I needed to tell her what had happened, but first I had to process the fact that the person I'd trusted most had been systematically trying to destroy my career. The betrayal cut deeper than any professional setback could. But as I sat there in the aftermath of Sarah's revelation, another thought crept in that chilled me even more. If she was willing to lie and manipulate to hurt me professionally, what else was she capable of? My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is just the beginning. You have no idea what's coming next." My hands were shaking as I stared at the anonymous text. The unknown number felt like a direct threat, and after what had just happened with Sarah, I couldn't dismiss it as some random spam message. The timing was too coincidental, too perfectly cruel. I screenshot the message and forwarded it to Linda immediately, then called her. She picked up on the first ring. I was hoping you'd call, Linda said without preamble. How did the conversation with Sarah go? Worse than I imagined. My voice cracked as I recounted the entire confrontation, from Sarah's initial denials to her final bitter admission about my supposedly undeserved success. Linda, she didn't even try to hide her resentment at the end. She's been watching me for years, cataloging everything she thinks I don't deserve. I'm so sorry. I know how much her friendship meant to you. But that's not even the worst part. I read her the anonymous text message. It came through right after she left. What if this isn't over? What if she's planning something else? Linda was quiet for a long moment. We need to document everything. Save that message. Keep records of all the incidents at work. Sarah might think she's won something here, but she's actually made a mistake by showing her hand. I feel like I'm losing my mind. 10 years, Linda. 10 years of friendship, and I never saw this coming. What does that say about my judgment? How can I trust anyone if I was so completely blind to who she really was? It says you're a loyal person who believes in the best of people. That's not a character flaw, even when it gets you hurt. I walked to my kitchen window and stared out at the darkening evening. I keep replaying conversations we've had over the years. All those times she seemed supportive when I got promoted or landed a big project. Was she just gathering ammunition? Was she taking notes on my weaknesses? You can't drive yourself crazy with that kind of analysis, Linda said gently. Some people are very good at hiding their true feelings, especially when those feelings are ugly. But I should have seen something. The way she'd sometimes make little comments about my luck, or how things seemed to come easily to me. I thought she was just being honest about the inequalities in life, not nurturing a personal grudge. My phone buzzed with another message, and my heart lurched. But it was just Linda texting me her direct work number. Call me immediately if you get any more messages, she said over the phone. And tomorrow, we're going to have a formal conversation with HR about documenting this harassment. What if no one believes me? Sarah's been so careful, so strategic. She probably made herself sound like a concerned friend when she called in those complaints. That's exactly why we need to get ahead of this. Her behavior tonight shows she's escalating, becoming less careful. People like Sarah often get overconfident and make mistakes. After hanging up with Linda, I couldn't settle. I kept checking my phone for more anonymous messages, jumping at every small sound in my apartment. The space felt contaminated somehow, knowing that Sarah had sat on my couch and lied to my face with such convincing sincerity. Around 10 p.m., my phone rang. It was my brother Michael, which surprised me since he rarely called on weeknights. Hey, this might sound random, Michael said, but Sarah called me about an hour ago. She seemed really upset, saying you two had a fight and that you'd accused her of some workplace sabotage thing. She wanted me to talk to you about getting help. My stomach dropped. Getting help for what? She said you were becoming paranoid and seeing conspiracies everywhere. That you were convinced people at work were out to get you, and now you were turning on your friends. She sounded genuinely worried, but also hurt. I closed my eyes, feeling the full scope of Sarah's manipulation becoming clear. She wasn't just trying to damage my professional reputation. She was working to isolate me personally, making me look unstable to my own family. Michael, she admitted to making false complaints about me to my employer. She confessed to deliberately trying to undermine my career because she resents my success. Really? Because that's not how she tells it. She said you've been under a lot of stress lately, and you're lashing out at everyone around you. The fact that my own brother sounded uncertain, like he was weighing her version against mine, made me feel sick. What exactly did she tell you? That you've been having problems at work And instead of taking responsibility, you're blaming everyone else. She said she tried to be supportive, but you accused her of betraying you. She was crying, asking me what she should do to help you. And you believed her? Michael hesitated. I don't know what to believe. You have been pretty stressed about work lately, and you've mentioned feeling like people were criticizing you more than usual. Maybe there's some truth in both versions? There's not. My voice was sharper than I intended. She manipulated the situation to make herself look like the caring friend, and me look like the unstable one. She's doing it to you right now. Look, I'm not taking sides here. I just think maybe you should consider that work stress can affect how you interpret situations. After ending that call, I sat in my kitchen with my head in my hands. Sarah had moved quickly, getting to Michael before I could tell him what had really happened. She'd positioned herself as the concerned friend dealing with my alleged mental health crisis, and she'd done it convincingly enough that my own brother was questioning my version of events. The strategic nature of it was almost impressive in its calculation. She knew exactly how to frame the situation to make me look paranoid while making herself look like the victim of my alleged breakdown. My phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. Told you this was just the beginning. No one will believe you now. I stared at that message, my hands trembling slightly. The anonymous texts had been unsettling before, but now they felt genuinely threatening. Someone was watching my every move, anticipating my reactions, and staying one step ahead. The next morning, I decided I needed to talk to Emma face to face. She was the only person who seemed to believe me completely, and I needed that anchor of support more than ever. I drove to her apartment, rehearsing how I'd explain about Michael's call and the escalating situation. Emma opened the door with a concerned expression. You look terrible. Come in, sit down. Sarah got to Michael, I said without preamble, settling into her familiar couch. She called him before I could tell him what really happened. Emma's face darkened. What did she tell him? That I'm having some kind of breakdown, that I'm paranoid and lashing out at everyone around me. She painted herself as the worried friend who's just trying to help me get the mental health support I supposedly need. And Michael bought it? He's questioning everything now. He said maybe there's truth in both versions, that work stress might be affecting how I interpret situations. My own brother thinks I might be losing it. Emma was quiet for a moment, processing this. That's actually really smart of her, in a sick way. She's not just attacking your professional reputation anymore. She's attacking your credibility as a person. There's more. I showed her the anonymous text from the night before. Someone's been sending me these messages. They know exactly what's happening as it unfolds. Emma read the message, her expression growing more serious. This feels different. More calculated than just workplace sabotage. I think Sarah's behind the text too, but I can't prove it. Just like I can't prove she made those complaints to my boss. What did your conversation with your boss reveal exactly? You mentioned he seemed to already know details about your personal life. I recounted the meeting in more detail, explaining how Mr. Peterson had mentioned specific incidents and seemed to have a narrative already formed about my behavior and attitude. He said multiple people had expressed concerns about my professionalism and my interactions with colleagues. But when I asked for specifics, he was vague. It was like he was reading from notes someone else had prepared. Emma leaned forward. What kind of specific incidents did he mention? Things like being dismissive in meetings, making inappropriate comments about other people's work, showing up late and leaving early. All things that could be interpreted different ways or taken out of context. Or completely fabricated. Exactly. But they're the kind of complaints that are hard to disprove because they're subjective. It's not like someone claiming I stole money or violated a specific policy. Emma stood up and began pacing, which she always did when she was thinking through a problem. Sarah knows you well enough to craft believable lies. She knows your work habits, your personality, the kinds of things you might actually do or say. What bothers me most is how systematic this feels. She didn't just make one complaint and see what happened. She built a whole case against me, and now she's doing the same thing with my personal relationships? The timing concerns me too, Emma said, stopping her pacing to look at me directly. She called Michael immediately after your confrontation with her, like she anticipated exactly how you'd react and had a counter strategy ready. My phone buzzed, another unknown number, but this time it was a call, not a text. I looked at Emma uncertainly. Should I answer it? Put it on speaker, she said, moving closer to me on the couch. I accepted the call, but didn't say anything. I know you're there. The voice was disguised, artificially distorted, but there was something familiar about the speech patterns underneath. You think you're so smart trying to figure this out. Emma and I looked at each other. She gestured for me to respond. Who is this? I asked. Someone who knows exactly what you deserve. You've always thought you were better than everyone else, and now you're finding out what happens when someone fights back. Sarah, is this you? There was a pause, then a laugh. Paranoid, just like I told your brother. You're going to blame me for everything now, aren't you? That's exactly what someone having a breakdown would do. The call ended abruptly. Emma and I sat in silence for a moment. That wasn't a denial, she finally said. No, it wasn't. But it also wasn't an admission I could use for anything. We need to think about this differently, Emma said. Sarah's playing a long game, but she's also getting bolder. That phone call was risky. She's confident now, maybe overconfident. Before I could respond, my phone rang again. This time, it was Michael. Can I come over to Emma's? He asked when I answered. I think we need to talk in person. There are some things about my conversation with Sarah that didn't sit right with me. 20 minutes later, Michael knocked on Emma's door. When he walked in, I could see the conflict written all over his face. He looked tired, like he'd been wrestling with something heavy. I've been thinking about that call with Sarah ever since it happened, he said, settling into the chair across from Emma and me. At first, I was just worried about you. But then I started remembering specific things she said, and they didn't add up. Emma leaned forward. What kind of things? She knew details about your work situation that I never told her, Michael said, looking directly at me. I mentioned you were having problems at your job, but I never said anything about customer complaints or your manager being concerned about your attitude. Sarah brought those things up like she already knew about them. My stomach dropped. I had never told Michael the specifics about what was happening at work. I'd kept it vague, just saying I was dealing with some workplace drama. What else did she say? I asked. Michael ran his hands through his hair. She talked about how you've been paranoid lately, making accusations against innocent people. She said you'd probably try to blame her for your problems because you can't accept responsibility for your own behavior. That's exactly what the person on the phone said, Emma pointed out, almost word for word. I know. That's what's bothering me. Michael looked genuinely troubled. And she kept asking me questions about who you'd been talking to, whether you had any evidence for your paranoid theories, what Emma thought about your state of mind. I felt a chill run through me. She was fishing for information. It felt like it. At the time, I thought she was just being a concerned friend. But looking back, he shook his head. She was way too interested in the details of what you might know or suspect. Emma and I exchanged glances. This was the first real crack in Sarah's facade. the first time someone else had noticed something off about her behavior. "There's something else," Michael continued. "After we hung up, I felt like I should call you right away and tell you about the conversation. But then I got a text from Sarah saying she hoped I wouldn't upset you by mentioning that she'd called, because you were already so fragile." "She was trying to control the narrative," I said, the pieces clicking into place. "She wanted to talk to you, but she didn't want you to tell me about it." "Exactly. And that made me realize she's been doing that for months. Every time she mentions you in conversation, she always adds some comment about not wanting to worry you or upset you. Like she's training people to keep things from you." My mind was racing. If Sarah had been doing this with Michael, she was probably doing it with others too. Creating a network of people who thought they were protecting me by not sharing information, when really they were isolating me. "Michael, I need you to think carefully," I said. "Has Sarah ever asked you about other people in my life? Emma? People from work? Anyone else?" He was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking back through conversations. "She asks about Emma sometimes. Whether you two have been spending more time together, if Emma thinks you're okay, stuff like that." Emma frowned. "She's never asked me about you directly, but now that I think about it, she does always seem to know when we've hung out. She'll mention it casually, like she just happened to hear about it." "She's been monitoring my relationships," I said, feeling a wave of nausea. "Keeping track of who I talk to, what I might be telling them." "The question is why?" Michael said. "What does she get out of all this?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Hey, just wanted to check on you. Michael mentioned you've been really stressed. Want to grab coffee tomorrow and talk?" The three of us stared at the message. She was making her move, trying to get back into direct contact with me now that she'd planted seeds of doubt with Michael. "Don't respond yet," Emma advised. "We need to think about this strategically." But I was already thinking ahead, and what I was realizing scared me more than anything that had happened so far. I stared at Sarah's text message, my hands trembling slightly as the full scope of what she'd been doing began to crystallize in my mind. The coffee shop around us seemed to fade into background noise as a chilling realization took hold. "She's not just monitoring my relationships," I said slowly, my voice barely above a whisper. "She's been systematically isolating me while positioning herself as my primary source of support." Emma leaned forward across the small wooden table, her brow furrowed with concern. "What do you mean?" I set my phone face down on the scarred surface, unable to look at Sarah's message any longer. The familiar weight of anxiety was building in my chest, but this time it felt different. Instead of the helpless confusion I'd been carrying for months, this felt sharp and clear. "Think about it," I said, looking between Emma and Michael. "She sabotages my job performance by filing false complaints, which makes me stressed and insecure. Then she positions herself as the person I should confide in about work problems. She monitors who I spend time with and plants seeds of doubt about my mental state, making people think they need to protect me by not sharing information with me." Michael nodded slowly, his expression growing darker. "And then, she becomes the central hub for information about you. People tell her things instead of telling you directly." "Exactly. And every time something goes wrong in my life, she's right there with comfort and advice. She's been creating the very problems she then swoops in to help me with." The afternoon light streaming through the coffee shop's large windows felt harsh against my skin. I could hear the espresso machine hissing behind the counter, the murmur of other conversations, but everything felt distant and surreal. Emma reached across and touched my arm gently. "That's incredibly manipulative, But why would she do all this? I thought back over years of friendship with Sarah, trying to see past the fog of manipulation to understand her motivations. Control, maybe? Or she likes being needed. She's always been the one with the stable job, the perfect life. Maybe she needed me to be the mess so she could be the savior. My phone buzzed again, another text from Sarah. I'm really worried about you. Michael said you seemed upset when he saw you today. Please call me. She's escalating, I observed, showing them the message. She knows Michael told me about her call. Michael ran his hands through his hair, looking frustrated. I feel like an idiot for not seeing this sooner. She's been using me to spy on you. Don't blame yourself, I said, though part of me was still processing the betrayal. She's been playing a long game. She's good at this. Emma was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. What are you going to do about work? If she's been filing complaints for months, there might be a whole file built up against you. The thought made my stomach clench. I don't know. I can't exactly go to my boss and say my friend has been lying about me without any proof. Actually, Michael said, straightening up in his chair, you might have more proof than you think. When Sarah called me today, she made some very specific claims about things you supposedly said and did. Things that I know aren't true because I was with you when they allegedly happened. Like what? She said you missed an important client meeting last week because you were too anxious to leave your apartment. But you and I had lunch that day, remember? You came straight from work and told me about how well the presentation had gone. I felt a spark of hope for the first time in weeks. That's right. And I have the client's email praising the presentation. She's been lying so extensively that she's bound to have made mistakes, Emma added. Contradictions between what she told your work and what actually happened. My phone buzzed a third time. This message was longer. I'm coming over. You're clearly not okay, and I'm worried you're going to do something impulsive. Don't make any big decisions until we talk. The three of us stared at the message. There was something different about the tone, more urgent and controlling than her usual messages. She's panicking, I realized. She knows her control is slipping. Are you going to let her come over? Emma asked. I looked at my two friends, really looked at them. For months, I'd felt isolated and alone, thinking I was losing my mind. But here they were, believing me, supporting me, helping me piece together the truth. Sarah had tried to control my relationships, but she hadn't succeeded in destroying them. No, I said firmly. I'm not going to let her come over, but I am going to respond to her. I picked up my phone and typed, I'm fine. I don't need you to come over. I'll talk to you when I'm ready. After I sent it, the three of us sat in tense silence, waiting. The response came within seconds. This isn't like you. Someone is obviously influencing you against me. I'm coming over whether you want me to or not. The mask had finally slipped completely. I stared at Sarah's message, my hands actually trembling as the full reality of what she'd been doing hit me. I'm coming over whether you want me to or not. The words felt like a threat, stripped of any pretense of friendship or concern. She's not coming over, Michael said firmly, reading over my shoulder. Not while we're here. But it wasn't fear I was feeling now. It was something else entirely. For months, I'd been questioning myself, wondering if I was losing my grip on reality, if I was somehow failing at work and life without realizing it. The anxiety had been eating me alive, making me second-guess every interaction, every decision. I'd felt like I was drowning in my own inadequacy. Now I knew the truth. I wasn't failing. I wasn't losing my mind. Someone I trusted had been systematically undermining me, poisoning my workplace relationships, and gaslighting me into believing I was the problem. The relief was almost overwhelming, but underneath it was a growing anger that surprised me with its intensity. "I need to document everything," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in weeks. "Every lie she's told, every contradiction I can prove." Emma nodded approvingly. "Start with what Michael mentioned about the client meeting. What other specific claims has she made that you can disprove?" I began pacing the room, my mind finally clear enough to think strategically. "She told me my boss was concerned about my punctuality, but I'm always early. She said there were complaints about my communication with clients, but I've gotten nothing but positive feedback directly from them." "What about the anxiety attacks she mentioned to me?" Michael asked. "She was very specific about you having panic attacks at work." "I haven't had a panic attack in over a year," I said, then stopped mid-step. "But she was the one who kept asking if I was feeling anxious, kept suggesting I might need to take time off, kept telling me I looked stressed, even when I felt fine." The pattern was becoming clearer. Sarah hadn't just been lying to my workplace about my behavior. She'd been trying to create the very problems she was reporting. Every concerned question about my mental health, every suggestion that I was struggling, every worried observation about my stress levels had been designed to make me doubt myself. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call, not a text. Sarah's name flashed on the screen. "Don't answer it," Emma said immediately. I looked at the phone, feeling something shift inside me. For months, I would have answered immediately, eager to explain myself, to reassure her, to fix whatever she thought was wrong. The old me would have been apologizing before she even spoke, taking responsibility for problems I didn't create. I let it go to voicemail. The silence that followed felt powerful. I was making a choice, setting a boundary, refusing to be manipulated. It was such a simple act, but it felt monumental. "How long do you think she's been planning this?" I asked, sinking back onto the couch. Michael shook his head. "That's what's so disturbing about it. This level of manipulation doesn't happen overnight. She's been building this campaign against you methodically." "But why?" The question that had been haunting me all evening came out as barely a whisper. "We've been friends for years. What did I do to deserve this?" Emma's expression was gentle, but serious. "You might not have done anything. Some people create drama because they need the control, or because they're threatened by others' success, or because they have deeper issues that have nothing to do with you." My phone chimed with a voicemail notification. Without thinking, I started to reach for it. "Wait," Michael said. "Are you ready to hear whatever manipulation she's about to try? Because that's what it's going to be." I hesitated, my hand hovering over the phone. Part of me was curious, but a bigger part of me was finally learning to protect my own peace of mind. "Actually, no," I said, setting the phone aside. "Whatever she has to say can wait until I'm ready to hear it on my terms." Emma smiled. Now that sounds like someone who's taking back control of her life. But even as I felt stronger and more clear-headed than I had in months, I knew this was far from over. Sarah had invested too much in her campaign of manipulation to give up easily. And tomorrow, I would still have to face whatever damage she'd already done at work. The real confrontation was still coming. The next morning brought a mixture of clarity and dread. I'd slept better than I had in weeks, finally understanding what I was dealing with, but I knew the hardest part was still ahead. I had to figure out how to handle the situation at work without making things worse for myself. Emma called while I was having coffee, her voice bright with determination. "I've been thinking about this all night. You need to document everything we found yesterday. Print out those screenshots. Make copies of the timeline we created. You need a paper trail. She was right. I spent the morning organizing everything into a clear narrative, creating a folder that told the whole story. The pattern was undeniable when laid out chronologically. Sarah's complaints always came right after I'd shared good news with her, and they escalated whenever I seemed happiest. My phone had been buzzing intermittently with texts from Sarah, each one more insistent than the last. I hadn't read any of them, but I could see the preview lines getting progressively more dramatic. Around noon, Michael stopped by with lunch. "How are you holding up?" "Better than expected, actually. Having answers helps, even if they're not the answers I wanted." I showed him the documentation I'd been working on. "I keep thinking about all the times I defended her to other people who questioned our friendship. There were signs, weren't there?" Michael studied the timeline I'd created. "There usually are, but hindsight is perfect vision. You trusted someone you cared about." "That's not a character flaw. I just feel so stupid for not seeing it sooner." "Don't do that to yourself. This level of manipulation is designed to be invisible. She's been playing a long game, making you question your own perceptions." The afternoon brought an unexpected call from Emma. Her voice was tight with anger when I answered. "She just tried to call me," Emma said. "Sarah called me, asking if I was worried about you. She said she'd been trying to reach you and you weren't responding, and she was concerned about your mental state." My stomach dropped. "What did you tell her?" "I told her you seemed perfectly fine to me, and that maybe she should respect your space if you weren't responding. But here's the thing. She kept pushing. She asked if I'd noticed any changes in your behavior, if you'd been acting strange or paranoid lately." The manipulation was continuing, expanding to include my family now. Sarah was trying to build her case by getting Emma to confirm concerns that didn't exist. Did she mention work at all? Not directly, but she made several comments about how stress can affect people's professional lives. It felt like she was fishing for information she could use somehow. I felt that familiar surge of anxiety, but this time it was different. Instead of the helpless panic I'd been experiencing for months, this was clear-eyed anger. I could see exactly what she was doing, and I wasn't going to let her manipulate Emma too. "I think it's time I listened to those voicemails," I said. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" I took a deep breath. "I need to know what I'm dealing with, but will you stay on the phone while I do it?" "Of course." The first voicemail was classic Sarah. Concerned, slightly hurt, wondering why I wasn't responding to her messages. She mentioned that she'd noticed I seemed stressed lately and just wanted to help. To anyone else, it would sound like a caring friend reaching out. The second one, from this morning, had a different tone. She sounded more urgent, mentioning that she was worried about me and might need to reach out to people who could help. The implied threat was subtle, but clear. The third one, from just an hour ago, was the most revealing. Her voice had an edge to it now, less syrupy sweetness and more frustration. She said she knew I was angry with her, but didn't understand why, and that my behavior was concerning people who cared about me. She ended by saying she hoped I would get the help I needed. "She's building a narrative," I told Emma after playing the messages. "Each voicemail is designed to sound reasonable individually, but together, they're creating a story about someone having a mental health crisis. The timing is important too. She called me right after leaving that last voicemail. She's trying to get corroboration for her version of events." I felt something crystallize inside me. For months, I'd been reacting to Sarah's moves, always defensive, always trying to prove I was okay. But I was done being reactive. It was time to take control of this situation. "I'm going to call her back," I said. "Are you sure that's wise? I can't keep avoiding this forever. And now that I understand what she's doing, I can handle the conversation differently. But as I scrolled to Sarah's number, my phone rang with an incoming call that made my blood run cold. It was my supervisor at work. The caller ID displayed my supervisor's name, and my heart hammered against my ribs. Emma must have heard the shift in my breathing through the phone. "What is it?" she asked. "It's my boss. She never calls after hours unless something's wrong." "Answer it. You know what's happening now. You can handle this." I accepted the call, keeping Emma on the line. "Hello, Ms. Rodriguez?" "Hi, I'm sorry to call so late. I wanted to check in with you about something that came up today. Is this a good time to talk?" Her tone was careful, professional but concerned. I could hear the awkwardness in her voice, like she was navigating unfamiliar territory. "Of course. What's going on?" "I received a call this afternoon from someone who identified herself as a close friend of yours. Sarah, I think. She expressed some concerns about your well-being and mentioned that you might be going through some personal difficulties that could be affecting your work performance." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Even though I'd been expecting this, hearing it confirmed felt like a punch to the stomach. I gripped the phone tighter. "I see. What exactly did she tell you?" "She was very diplomatic about it, but she suggested that you've been under significant stress lately and that she was worried about how it might impact your professional responsibilities. She mentioned that you haven't been responding to friends and family, and that your behavior has been concerning to people who care about you." I could practically hear Sarah's voice in those words, the careful way she would have presented herself as the worried friend just trying to help. "Ms. Rodriguez, I want to be completely transparent with you about this situation. Sarah has been contacting my workplace without my knowledge or consent. The concerns she's raising are not based in reality. This is actually part of a pattern of manipulative behavior that I've been dealing with for several months." There was a pause. "That's quite serious. Can you tell me more about what you mean?" "She's been systematically trying to undermine my reputation and create problems in my personal and professional life. The stress she mentioned? It's stress caused by her behavior, not by anything else in my life. My work performance has been consistent, and I believe my track record speaks for itself." "It does. That's actually part of why I wanted to talk to you directly. The concerns she raised didn't align with what I've observed from you professionally, but I had to take the call seriously given the nature of what she was suggesting. I felt a surge of gratitude for my supervisor's directness. "I appreciate you coming to me about this. What did you tell her?" I thanked her for her concern, but explained that personnel matters are confidential and that if you were experiencing difficulties that affected your work, it would be something we'd address directly with you. I also mentioned that it's generally not appropriate for friends or family members to contact someone's employer about personal concerns unless there's an imminent safety issue. How did she respond to that? She seemed disappointed, I suppose. She pushed a bit, saying she was worried that you might not seek help on your own, but I maintained our position. I did want to follow up with you directly, though, both to let you know about the call and to make sure everything is all right from your perspective. I looked around my tidy apartment, thought about my recent work projects, my relationships with colleagues, my overall life stability. Everything Sarah had tried to paint as concerning was actually going well. The only source of chaos in my life was Sarah herself. From a work perspective, everything is fine. I'm keeping up with my responsibilities, my projects are on track, and I feel good about my performance. The only issue I'm dealing with is this situation with Sarah, which I'm actively working to resolve. That's what I expected to hear, honestly. Your work has been solid, and I haven't noticed any changes in your performance or behavior that would raise red flags. After we ended the call, I realized Emma had been quietly listening the entire time. She handled that well, Emma said. And more importantly, so did you. You were clear, direct, and honest without getting defensive. I can't believe Sarah actually called my workplace. I mean, I knew she was doing it based on what my manager mentioned before, but hearing it confirmed like that. It's a serious boundary violation. But look what happened. Your supervisor saw right through it. Sarah's plan backfired because the story she was telling didn't match the reality of who you are at work. I felt something shift inside me, a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in months. I think I'm ready to call Sarah now. What are you going to say? The truth, all of it. No more trying to manage her feelings or wondering if I'm being too harsh. She crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. I scrolled to Sarah's number and hit call. She answered on the second ring, her voice immediately bright and relieved. Oh, thank goodness. I've been so worried about you. I left you several messages, and when you didn't respond, I just didn't know what to think. Are you okay? The concern in her voice sounded so genuine that for just a moment, I almost doubted myself. This was her skill, making her manipulation sound like care, making her victims question their own perceptions. Sarah, I need you to stop contacting me, and I need you to stop contacting people in my life. The brightness in her voice faltered slightly. I don't understand. I was just worried about you because you haven't been responding to anyone. And Emma mentioned that you seemed stressed when I talked to her earlier. You called my supervisor at work today. Silence stretched between us. When she finally spoke, her tone had shifted to something more defensive. I was concerned about you. When someone you care about stops communicating and seems to be struggling, sometimes you have to reach out to people who might be able to help. Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I am not struggling. I am not having a mental health crisis. I am not unable to manage my responsibilities. The only problem in my life right now is your behavior. That's not fair. I've been nothing but supportive and concerned about you. You've been calling my workplace with false complaints about my behavior for months. You've been contacting my friends to try to get them to confirm concerns that don't exist. You've been leaving voicemails designed to make me look unstable. This isn't support, Sarah. This is harassment. Her voice went cold in a way I'd never heard before. I think you're being paranoid and unreasonable. Maybe you should consider that people are worried about you for a reason. And there it was. The mask, finally slipping. No more fake concern. No more manipulation disguised as care. Just the cold reality of what she'd been doing. This conversation is over, Sarah. Do not contact me again. Do not contact my friends, my family, or my workplace. If you continue this behavior, I will take formal action to stop it. You're making a mistake. People who care about you can see that you're not thinking clearly. Goodbye, Sarah. I hung up and immediately blocked her number. Then I blocked her on social media, email, everywhere I could think of. Emma was still on the line. How do you feel? I took a deep breath, really considering the question. Lighter, like I've been carrying something heavy for months and finally put it down. You handled that perfectly. You were clear, you didn't get drawn into her manipulations, and you set firm boundaries. The scariest part is how convincing she sounded at first. Even knowing what she's been doing, part of me still wanted to believe she was just a concerned friend. That's what makes this kind of manipulation so insidious. It exploits our desire to think the best of people and to doubt our own perceptions when someone presents themselves as caring. Over the next few days, I felt like I was emerging from a fog I hadn't even realized I was walking through. Sarah tried calling from different numbers twice, but I didn't answer. She sent a card to my apartment that I threw away without opening. Then, finally, silence. My manager checked in with me a week later. No more concerning phone calls from friends? She said with a slight smile. I take it you resolved that situation? I did. Thank you for handling it so professionally and for talking to me directly instead of just taking someone else's word about my state of mind. Of course. It was pretty clear to me that something didn't add up. Your work speaks for itself. A month later, Emma and I were having coffee when she brought up what had happened. You know, I keep thinking about how long this went on before you realized what was happening. It makes me wonder how many people are dealing with similar situations without recognizing the patterns. I think about that too. The hardest part was that it started so gradually and it was disguised as concern. By the time I realized what was happening, I was already doubting my own judgment. What would you want people to know if they think they might be experiencing something similar? I stirred my coffee thoughtfully. Trust your instincts. If someone's help or concern is making your life more chaotic rather than better, pay attention to that. Real support builds you up and respects your boundaries. Manipulation tears you down while pretending to care about you. And don't be afraid to set firm boundaries, even with people who claim to care about you. Exactly. Someone who truly cares about you will respect your boundaries, even if they don't understand them. Someone who's manipulating you will push against those boundaries and try to make you feel guilty for setting them. The experience had been exhausting and confusing, but it had also taught me something valuable about recognizing manipulation and trusting my own perceptions. Most importantly, it had shown me the difference between people who genuinely support you and those who create problems while pretending to solve them. Sarah never contacted me again after that last attempt. Sometimes, I wondered if she found someone else to focus her manipulative energy on, but I realized that wasn't my responsibility to worry about. My responsibility was to protect my own peace and maintain the boundaries I'd finally learned to set. The whole experience had been a masterclass in recognizing covert manipulation, and while I wouldn't wish it on anyone, it had ultimately made me stronger and more aware of these kinds of toxic patterns. Sometimes, the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to participate in someone else's drama, no matter how they try to disguise it as care or concern.